Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Dovecot Studios. My name is Halla Mohieddeen. I'm a journalist and broadcaster from Glasgow, and I am delighted to welcome you to the venue this evening. Thank you for joining us in person and, of course, online for Scotland's cultural future, Culture Hustings for the next Parliament. This event has been organised by Culture Counts, the Federation of Scottish Theatre, Scottish Contemporary Arts Network, Festivals Edinburgh, Equal Media and Culture Centre, and Campaign for the Arts ahead of the forthcoming election in May. This is an opportunity to hear from party representatives directly on key issues facing the cultural sector. Now, when you signed up for the hustings, you would have been prompted to ask a question to the party representatives here. We've had so many questions that we could have had a hustings that would have lasted for a week. So what we've done is, because we can't put every single question to the speakers, we have chosen the questions that had the largest amount of interest, synthesised some of them, and we will put 6 of those to our party representatives directly. Before I introduce them, I just want to remind you all of how this event is going to proceed. We would like the hustings to be a safe space to talk about the issues faced by the culture sector and how the candidates are planning to provide solutions if elected. At this event, we want everyone to be treated with equal respect. We've provided a quiet space upstairs in the upper balcony. If anyone would like to make use of that, please speak to one of the event organisers. They're all wearing a purple lanyard. This event is designed to be fair to all the political parties, so I'm going to aim for everyone to have an equal amount of time to respond to questions and to make their case. After I introduce each speaker, they'll be given 1 minute to provide an introduction and to outline their background, their interest in culture. And then after we've had introductions from all the speakers, we'll move immediately into questions. Each question will be aimed at one speaker. They'll then have 2 minutes to answer. After that, each of the other candidates will have a maximum of 90 seconds to respond. We've got a countdown clock here on the stage, and I'm going to ask all of the candidates to respect the timing so that we can get through as many questions as possible. At the end of the event, each candidate will be given 1 minute to provide closing remarks. Finally, we're not expecting any fire drills this evening, so if the fire alarm does sound, I'm going to ask you all to leave the room through the fire escape doors. The fire exits are here and here, so on opposite sides of this room, and just make your way downstairs as fast as you can, and we will be gathering in Infirmary Street just outside the building. Toilets, you walk past them on the way into the building here. You don't need to raise your hand to go, you can just make your way there directly. People at home, I'm hoping you know where your toilets are. And if I could also ask everybody to have your phone on silent just throughout the event. I've been caught out by mine already, so if you could put it on silent just so that we're not interrupted during the event, we would greatly appreciate that. And so without further ado, let me introduce our party representatives. Angus Robertson, MSP, is the MSP for Edinburgh Central and Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, and Angus is representing the Scottish National Party. Euan Davidson is representing the Scottish Liberal Democrats. He is a councillor for the City of Edinburgh, representing Corstorphine and Murrayfield. Malcolm Offord is the leader of Reform UK Scotland. Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party is MSP for Mid Scotland and Fife and the Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Business, Economy, Tourism and Culture. Neil Bibby is here from Scottish Labour. He is the MSP for West Scotland and the spokesperson on the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture. And finally, Manivannan is representing the Scottish Green Party. They are the lead candidate for Edinburgh and East Lothian. Welcome to all of you. I will now invite each representative, beginning with Angus Robertson and then moving across the stage to present their opening remarks. You each have 1 minute. Angus, take it away.
Thank you very much, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you all, and thank you very much for coming along. This is the first hustings that I've taken part in the Scottish Parliament election campaign in the run-up to the polls on the 7th of May, and I'm delighted that the first hustings I'm taking part in is on culture. So it's been an honour for me to represent this part of Scotland's capital city, which is home to many of our greatest cultural and artistic organisations and venues, and as has been pointed out in the introduction, I am the Cabinet Secretary for Culture, so it's been a particular honour for me to deliver the biggest single uplift in funding for culture and the arts with the introduction of multi-year funding. I believe that's a foundational change. We're now 70% on the way to delivering that £100 million uplift. I look forward to being able to point out certain other things that I'm particularly proud of having been able to deliver as Culture Secretary, and if you vote for the SNP in the elections, I hope I might be able to return and continue the job as Culture Secretary. Thank you very much.
There you are.
On the nose.
1 minute on the nose. You've done this before, I'm sure. And now over to you, Euan Davidson.
Thank you for Culture Counts and the partner organisations for organising this evening. Let me start with this. Culture it's not a luxury for us. It shapes how we see ourselves, how we connect with one another, and how the world sees Scotland. Scotland's creative industries generate around 5.4 billion gross value added. Our festivals alone are a global calling card. Our festivals across towns, rural communities and islands. Cultural activity drives tourism, it creates jobs and sustains civic pride. So as Liberal Democrats, we start from a simple principle. Culture should be treated as a core economic and civic infrastructure and funded accordingly, and that means stability. In this Parliament, this sector has faced damaging uncertainty, cuts announced then partially reversed. This stop-start approach undermines confidence, investment and workforce security. We want to see something different, and I hope we can explain that tonight. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. Malcolm Offord.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see you all this evening. So my name is Malcolm Offord from Reform UK, and I'm on the record as saying that my ambition for Scotland is to make Scotland wealthy and healthy. Wealth is not just money. Wealth is very much all to do with our well-being, and our culture and our cultural health is a very important part of our overall cultural wealth. The creative industries is one of our great centres, clusters of excellence. And in fact, when I was a minister in Scotland Office, I spent some time in Mumbai and I met one of the Bollywood film producers. They love filming in Scotland, not just because of the great scenery, but because of the talent and the capability and the technical capability we have here. And my concern really is to make sure that our young people are getting that culture in their schools. And I went to my local schools. We had great, we sang in choirs, we had orchestras, we did a lot of music, and I just hope that we can continue that for the next generation to come. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much indeed. Murdo, Fraser.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for the invitation to come along. As the Conservative culture spokesman, my interests are in music, in musical theatre, in opera, in books. I'm a published author and a podcaster, and in visual arts. So hopefully there will be some questions around the audience tonight on some of those topics. Why is culture important? It's important economically. And you see that with the festivals here in Edinburgh, events right across Scotland at a local level, generating wealth, generating jobs for people. It's important socially because culture tells us what we're about as a country. And one of the things that makes Scotland so unique in the world is the distinct culture we have and the value that brings and the way it brings people from across the world to visit Scotland. But culture is important in itself, and government's got a role in making sure culture survives and thrives. And we have to look at funding, we have to look at leadership from the top, we have to look at education, and above all, make sure the money's there to support culture. Thank you.
Okay. And Neil Bibby.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to join with you this evening. And firstly, thank you to all of you for the work you do week in, week out to enrich the lives of individuals, communities and our country. I can't say my professional contribution has been the same as yours. My first job was as a cinema usher in Glasgow, so I do say I worked in the film industry. But what I have tried to contribute over the last 3 years as Scottish Labour spokesperson for culture is to be an ally and supporter of the cultural sector in Scotland. And that has been whether that to be promote the fantastic work that you're doing, to engage with many of the organisations that have been here, but also to stand with you when you faced funding uncertainty and funding cuts. And that's crucially important. My belief and my party's belief is we need to create a fair and equal society, and we need to create a fair and equal culture sector as well, and the two are very much interlinked. We know we have huge strengths in our cultural sector, but we cannot take those for granted. Just because something is the case just now doesn't mean it will be ever thus. But we also have huge challenges as well, and I mentioned the perfect storm of huge uncertainty and a funding crisis as well. Okay. I believe, oh sorry, I'm out for time. I'll chat more later, thanks.
It goes fast. Euan Manivannan from the Green Party.
No, never mind. Hi everyone. I'm Q. I'm the diversity. I'm the Scottish Greens. I'm a lead candidate for the Scottish Greens in Edinburgh and East Lothian, but I'm not just here in my role as the politician to be. I'm also here as an artist. I'm a person of colour. I'm an immigrant and a trans person. So I find myself in a very interesting position. I'm here. I came to Scotland, I found my place here through culture in many ways. I founded the Scottish Tamil Arts Collective. I run a monthly music and poetry night, fundraising for Palestine. If anything, I am the stereotype. So I also know that when that door is open, it's open, but when it costs more than it should, it's closed and it's closed. The culture sector gave me a language in many ways for belonging, I'd say, as I mentioned. But while Labour in Westminster continues cutting arts budgets for the second spending review running, unprecedented, by the way, since 1998, and Reform threatens to strip the diversity that makes the arts what it is right now, the Scottish Greens, that's the reason why I'm with them, have a different offer to make. And I think we'll chat more about that as we go on.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are your 6 candidates this evening. We're going to start with the questions that were sent in by people who are joining us on the live stream, joining us in the room. The questions that you are all being asked tonight reflect the priorities of those in this room and watching online. When we asked what matters most, funding and resources came out clearly as the #1 concern. Although some parts of the sector have stabilised in recent years, significant pressures remain across the system. Local authority culture budgets are under unprecedented strain. Support available to individuals and freelancers for self-directed work is limited, and investment is unevenly distributed across the country, and overall, culture accounts for less than 1% of Scotland's annual public expenditure. How would you ensure that funding is sufficient, sustainable and fairly spread? And that question is asked to Euan Manivannan from the Scottish Green Party for a 2-minute response.
Thank you so much, Halla. I think the Scottish Government is very much on track with its commitments to increase the culture budget by 100 million, and I really appreciate the work that Angus and a lot of others have done for that, hopefully by 28 or 29. But that's welcome, but the money is not quite being spent or reaching the people who need it most. The national performing companies, for instance, have had broadly frozen budgets for up to 15 years. Unless that changes, some will be forced to abandon their salaried performers entirely for freelancers, and that's a reality that we're working with. The transient visitor levy, which when the Greens proposed it 15 years ago, most of the parties on this here right now laughed us out of the room, but now Edinburgh has £35 million to spend, so you're welcome for that. But I think it's, in terms of what funding is required now as we go on, we also need to make sure again that this money goes to the right places, whether that's the Lead Theatre that we made sure it went through, and whether this goes towards making venues more accessible and efficient. We should also just be honest that the current legislation that we has ties councils up in unending bureaucracy, and that is a significant detriment to the funding climate that we exist in. We are also honest that the money must pass through a TVL panel and can only be spent on tourist-related activities, and that is a limitation bureaucracy-wise. But in other countries, it still just generally goes into the general budget. We would simplify this in the Greens so that the money actually reaches communities that need it most, not just areas which already have good provision. We need to ensure that the large cultural events pay their way But Taylor Swift, and during when the concerts happened, received council services, cleaning, security worth nearly £40,000 at public expense. And that's why the Greens support stadium taxes and proper levies on large commercial events that profit from Scotland's public infrastructure. And the tension that we need to name, honestly, is... Oh, I have just 7 seconds left. Wow, the clock runs far. Essentially, we need more public funding. It needs to go to the artists. Thank you.
Okay, and now everyone on the panel is going to get 90 seconds to respond. Angus Robertson from the SNP.
Well, thank you very much. So when I became Culture Secretary, it was immediately obvious to me we were still in COVID conditions, spending a lot of time in online meetings, talking with people right across the sector, that the number one issue for the culture and arts sector in Scotland related to funding. Not just about COVID recovery, but that there was a fundamental challenge for the culture and arts sector in funding. And I then wrote a submission off the back of Culture Counts, who gave a very well evidenced report about the gap in funding, and what was required in the first instance was an uplift, an annual uplift of £100 million for culture and the arts. And the submission was agreed by the Scottish Government, and we have been in the process of delivering that. And we are now 70% of the way to delivering that. The biggest change, as many of you will be aware, is the introduction of multi-year funding, the doubling of the number of organisations and venues that receive multi-year funding, and that, I believe, is foundational for the culture and art sector in Scotland. It's not finished business. Absolutely right to raise the national performing companies and indeed the national collections, and as I've said publicly, that is on my list as we move towards delivering the £100 million pledge on increase in funding. There are a number of other things that have been said. Oh goodness, 8 seconds. How on earth can I manage that? So we're going to deliver on our pledge, £100 million, but there is more to do, and I'm happy to talk about distribution, making sure it's reaching people, the likes of freelancers, better.
Excellent. Okay, and Euan Davidson, Scottish Liberal Democrats.
I think we need to be honest that the biggest damage in recent years hasn't just been the level of funding, it's been the instability. Announced cuts, then reversals, uncertainty year on year. That stop-start approach has materially damaged confidence in the sector. It makes it harder for organisations to plan, it makes it harder for freelancers to plan their time and their lives, and it makes it harder for businesses to invest in the sector. So I'm pleased we've seen some progress in multi-year settlements, but it's long overdue and it's taken far too long. The other issue with highlight with funding is local government. So much of culture funding comes via local government. As a councillor, we've seen how brutal the last decade has been for local government. We've lost 600 million in Edinburgh alone from the Scottish Government over the last decade. That, let's be honest, the culture sector is often the first to take the hit from that cuts. Until we see proper year-on-year, multi-year settlement for local government, I think we're going to struggle to see sustainable funding for the sector.
Okay. Malcolm Offord from Reform.
Thank you. So we're all here because we believe in the culture sector. We mentioned that creative industries, creative arts is one of our centres of excellence in Scotland, and we need to create a pathway for our young people to go into that. They're so well regarded around the world. For me, the issue is, whatever group we meet, everybody obviously wants more money. And the question is, how do you make everything spread around? For me, we need to make the country more wealthy. Our economy is not growing fast enough. Our economy is growing way too low. Our growth rate is less than 1%. It needs to be up at 2 or 3%. We need to do that for a number of reasons, because if we grow the economy, we'll raise more taxes. And with more taxes, we'll have more choices, and we'll be able to fund more activities. But second of all, we also need to be aware of the role the philanthropic sector plays in our arts. And if you go around most of the buildings, most of the arts venues in Edinburgh and Glasgow, you'll find that there's been a lot of philanthropy. This building itself, as you know, was put together, was funded by a philanthropist called Alistair Salveson, a very big donor to the arts. I'm concerned that there's a generation of philanthropists coming through who are now in their 70s and 80s, and we're not getting people coming through in their 40s and 50s who will support the arts if they're in a more booming economy. So for me, the two things are linked. Let's grow our economy, let's make more money will become available, and then we can support a more thriving arts centre. Our culture sector does incredibly well on the budget is on. Just think how much better it could do if we actually had more money to fund it.
Okay, Murdo Fraser, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Thank you very much. First of all, well done to Angus on the 3-year funding. That was waited for a long time. The SNP have been in power for 19 years, and finally we've got around to that happening. And Euan was absolutely right when he talked about this, zigzag up and down that we saw, funding, no certainty from year to year. We still have an issue with the national performing companies. But the more serious issue is that most arts in this country is funded at a local level through local authorities. And local authorities have been the whipping boy of this SNP administration in terms of funding over a long period of time. And councils which right now are meeting to set their budget, some of that have done that already, some of that are doing this week, some of that are doing next week. They're looking at what they've got to try and afford. They've got to fund social care, they've got to fund education, they've got to fund roads. They have huge statutory responsibilities. So when they're looking at where they can save money, it's the things they think are not core, like culture, that gets cut. So unless we're prepared to commit to proper local authority funding, which is why the Scottish Conservatives have got a policy for a local power bill, and just as there's a fiscal agreement between the UK government and the Scottish government about the proportion of money that comes to Scotland from increases, we should have the same between the Scottish government and local councils. So the Scottish government's budget goes up 10%, local council budgets go up 10% as well. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see cuts on the ground to local projects.
And finally, Neil Bibby, Scottish Labour.
Yeah, well, of course, the culture sector has suffered from years of standstill funding, and as we've just heard, local councils have had their budgets decimated over around £10 billion of cumulative real terms cuts over the last decade, which has had a devastating impact on council services, and we know that cultural services have taken a huge hit from that. I do welcome the increase in funding in the culture sector over the last 2 years. I just think it's perhaps more than a coincidence it's coincided with 2 years of a Labour government giving the Scottish Government a record funding settlement. But obviously that is welcome. The one thing that will help, I agree with Malcolm, economic growth. We need economic growth in this country because we know that the Scottish Government, 50% of the revenues we raise are dependent on how well the Scottish economy is doing. So we do need economic growth, and we need to recognise the importance that the creative industries and the culture sector can play in that economic growth, and that needs to be a key part of our economic strategy as well. What won't help, which has been proposed by a number of parties on the panel, is massive tax cuts, because if we have those massive tax cuts, then we will have less money to spend on the culture sector. Scottish Labour is committed to transparent, multi-year, predictable funding. As Murdo just said, fair funding for councils is vital. We should see Barnett-style funding being provided from our councils if the Scottish Government receive it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I know these, it seems quite strict with this timer, but just so everyone's aware, that was question 1. So we've got another 5 of these. Can I just take a quick temperature check of the room? How is everyone? Is it warm in here? Shall we say, okay, so we've requested a bit more water up on the panel, and also if we could maybe get a couple of windows open. Would that help? So I'll wait for some purple lanyards and then hopefully we'll get some windows open. But for now, we're going to press on to question 2. And hopefully we can bring the temperature in the room down a little bit. But everyone's been very well behaved so far, so I'm very proud of you all. Question 2 is on the strategic direction. Recent years have seen significant growth in shared cross-party understanding among policymakers, politicians, the cultural sector and the wider public about the value of culture and what it contributes to Scotland's economy, society, communities and international reputation. There's also growing recognition of the scale of untapped opportunity, particularly in how culture can contribute to cross-cutting outcomes in health, education, economic development and community well-being. Yet progress in translating that shared understanding into meaningful change has been limited. How do we move beyond restating the case and begin working towards a coherent, shared and long-term vision for culture in Scotland? Is dedicated legislation needed? to provide a clear and lasting framework for that future? And that question is addressed to Angus Robertson from the SNP.
Goodness. The first thing to say is the Scottish Government is committed to the mainstreaming of culture and the arts across government. So that's a recognition of the impact, for example, in health and well-being, that arts and culture can play. That's a benefit for health, but it's a benefit for large parts of the rest of what government delivers. And I'm working hard within government to make sure that we understand the advantages that can be brought and to try and impress on the whole of government the importance of culture and the arts in delivering, amongst other things, health and well-being. So there are regular meetings that take place to try and drive that approach through government. The question was very specific about whether there should be legislation. I know this is a position that is favoured by Culture Counts. We've already been in conversation around that, and I'm open to it. As I have said to them, I would be very keen to see examples of best practice internationally. There are other countries that manage their government business more through a legislative route. We largely don't do that here. We've managed to introduce multi-year funding without a legislative approach as an example of why legislation is not necessarily required. But as I've said, I'm open to that. I think we need to appreciate the value of culture and the arts and not just the cost. And if we understand that what culture can deliver is literally the health and well-being of the nation as a whole, we need to make sure that that is understood right across government. The Scottish National Party is committed to it. We're already doing it. Is there more that needs to be done? Yes, absolutely. But as we've rolled out multi-year funding across the culture and arts sector, supporting, amongst other things, very productive areas like the screen sector, which is heading towards £1 billion GVA turnover in Scotland, I think we appreciate not just the value but also the cost, and it is an investment in the health and well-being of the country as well as our cultural output as a whole.
Okay, thank you. And now you each have 90 seconds to respond. We'll start with Euan Davidson from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Yes, I think we've seen a lot of progress over the last few years about recognising the advantages that culture brings to health and education, particularly outcomes. I think there's multiple things we can do to embed that without necessarily going down a legislative route yet. I think we need to be open to that. I think there's, like Angus, I'd like to hear best practice internationally on that front. But yeah, I think we need to go further on multi-year funding frameworks. That level of certainty will embed it in policy making across the framework. We need to embed culture in all of our economic strategies. We want to see an industrial and skills strategy brought forward by the Scottish Government with a clear cultural stream within that industrial strategy. That would force the economic spending to be focused in the cultural sector. We also want to strengthen youth provision. We want to see a youth work bill brought forward with dedicated support for the streams that bring in, inspire young people to take part in the cultural sector via youth work. And I will go back to local government spending. If councils have certainty in their funding, they will invest in culture. We know this. When councils had that power, when they had that certainty, they invested in our institutions and our organisations. Thank you.
Okay. And now Malcolm Offord from Reform.
So I think if we need to rely on legislation to create our culture, we're in a bad place. I mean, culture comes from people and communities, and Scotland's full of that because we have vibrant people and vibrant communities. So I don't think we need to be legislating for that. What we need to do is allow that to come through and come forward by local people in local places. And I see that in my hometown where we redeveloped the Beacon Theatre in Greenwich. We shut down the art school and rebuilt a brand new theatre. The local people got around that. It's a vibrant community hub now in that community. My concern is that we need to drive this further into our schools. I'm concerned about the fact there's less music tuition in schools. Nicola Benedetti was quite vocal about this recently, about the need to continue that in our schools. And as our population increases in diversity and in culture across different communities, what better way to bring everyone together in shared activities? I don't know how many of you sang in a choir at school. I did. It's an incredible thing to do. It brings everyone together. It's a very inclusive concept. How many of our schools run choirs? You know, probably less than 50%, maybe even less than 20%. So I think this is something that we need to think about embedding into our local communities. I'm much more concerned about that than passing laws in Hollywood.
Okay, thank you. And Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
So I think going back to the question is about how culture can be used in a cross-cutting way, recognising the real benefits, the benefits to the economy, the benefits to individuals, the social benefits, the health benefits, particularly things like mental health, where I think the culture can play a very important role. I think there's a need for a partnership approach that involves public sector, third sector, and private sector. And I think there's a strong role for the private sector. There are very successful private sector operators in the cultural space. Perhaps what we should be doing is providing greater incentives, tax incentives for those who want to invest in culture, making that more attractive. We've seen that with the film industry being tremendously successful already. Britain, I think, is the second most popular country on the planet to make films at the moment. And Scotland gets a share of that, probably not a big enough share. And one of the concerns I have is we have production companies based down south making films in Scotland, not providing secure jobs for people here. But Culture Council have got this very interesting idea for having a Culture Act. I think there's something in that, actually. I don't agree with Malcolm. I think there is something in that about trying to embed culture right across the public sector in Scotland. And if we're going to see the security of funding, I think everybody here wants to see, underpinning that with a Culture Act, I think would be very useful. So when you see the Conservative manifesto for the elections in May, you might just see a reference to a Culture Act.
Very good. And Neil Bibby from Scottish Labour.
Well, culture is good for us. I'm sure you would be relieved to hear that from me. I'm sure we all say it on the panel. The question is, what do we do to, mainstream it and make sure that we are getting the benefits for everyone? And that's critically important, because we aren't doing enough as it is. I'm open to a conversation about legislation, as other panel members have said. I do think, though, we need to focus on outcomes and be very outcomes driven, because a lot of time we pass legislation in Parliament that doesn't actually change very much. So what is it we are trying to achieve? So I'm open to a conversation about how we can best do that. The 1982 Local Government Scotland Act has a provision in it that adequate cultural provision should be provided in communities. That appears to be quite weak legislation when we see a reduction in cultural and leisure services happening right across Scotland. So I do think there is merit in looking at that. And as much as I say about outcomes, even, it is important actually to focus on outcomes, but it's also important for us to send a signal about what's important and what we value, because what I said right at the start was, although we have huge strengths in our cultural sector, we cannot take it for granted. And I do think there's an importance of looking at the outcomes, but also sending equally a message about what we value and what's important to us. And I'm keen, as I said earlier, also to work in genuine partnership to try and look at how we can best take that agenda forward. Thank you. And
finally, Manivannan from the Scottish Green Party.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with Angus in the sense that culture is not just about money. It's about what makes people thrive at the end of the day. And I agree with Malcolm that culture comes from the people, but Malcolm, you confuse me every now and then, because when you say that culture is not under threat and it comes from the people, when you're cutting employment rights, when you're raising rents, when you are making it very hard for immigrants, for people of colour to exist in this country, where are you expecting that culture to come from? Which is why we need to legislate culture into existence, to make it a legal responsibility, and which is why the Greens very much stand with the Culture Act and support it. But it's not simply enough to do that. It's also important to realise that culture is integrated deeply into poverty, into questions of social well-being, into questions of healthcare, which is why we need conversations around the pilot scheme for flexible childcare that has been introduced in some councils to be expanded then to the rest of the country. We need rent controls, which we, the Greens and others, have helped deliver. We need to expand free travel so that people are able to get to the places they want to be in order to have culture that they can then create. It's not some tangible up in the air, ghastly entity. It is a very real thing. And any current legislation at the end of the day, when we are legislating the Culture Act, we get only one chance at this. It's going to be once in a generation, and you will see weapons weaponizations of the culture wars that so supposedly exist. Reform tried to fire DEI officers in Lincolnshire before realizing that there were none. So this culture war has been both fabricated by them and won in a single day somehow. But at the same time, if you want culture to be for everybody, then we better mean that it is for everybody, not that it's excluding women, trans people, and everyone else.
Okay, that's time. Let's move on to question 3, and this is on the subject of communities. Cultural activity is central to placemaking, community wealth building and civic identity across Scotland. It also plays a practical role in building bridges between different groups, strengthening local relationships and making towns, villages and cities places where people actively want to live and stay. Yet provision is uneven and often fragile, particularly outside the central belt and in rural and island areas. In many places, delivering cultural activity depends on short-term funding cycles and centralised decision-making rather than stable local infrastructure and locally shaped priorities. How will you ensure that communities in every part of Scotland have sustained access to cultural spaces, resources and decision-making? And that question is addressed to Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party for a 2-minute response.
Okay, thanks very much. Really wide-ranging question. Let me start off just talking about community wealth building that you mentioned, because the Parliament's just passed a bill on community wealth building that I was very involved in because I was on the parliamentary committee. And what that requires all public bodies and local authorities to do is set out a community wealth building action plan and set out how they will achieve that. And to me that's very positive, but in itself does nothing unless we actually see some practical outcomes from it. It's all very well passing a bill, but we actually need to see action on the ground, and that will require resources. If we're going to see communities back, they will require 2 things. First of all, they require funding. It goes back to the point we made earlier about the funding coming at a local level tends to come through local councils. If local councils are getting their budgets squeezed, culture tends to be the first thing that goes. So we need to look at how we support councils. I've already talked about how we would set up a funding mechanism to support local councils. And the other really important issue here is the one of venues. Now, right now across Scotland, we are seeing lots of premises used for cultural activities, things like music venues, pubs, hotels, which are closing at an alarming rate because of the burden of taxation. In particular, right now we're seeing a rates revaluation. Seeing some small pubs, hotels that might be venues for local music and everything else, seeing their bills increased by 400 to 600%. And it's no wonder this has become a major crisis for hospitality. And if you don't have somewhere to gather, then you can't have cultural activities. And many of these local pubs and hotels have been where people want to get together. Now, just 2 weeks ago, in Northern Ireland, the Northern Irish Finance Minister announced he was going to stop the revaluation because he realised it was a crisis for hospitality in Northern Ireland. Just this week, I was saying to the Scottish Government, why can't you do the same? If Northern Ireland can stop this revaluation to save hospitality, you need to do the same, and that would make sure we have the venues that we need.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now each of the candidates will get a 90-second response, and we'll start with Malcolm Offord from Reform.
So we will be proposing in our manifesto a new deal for local authorities. And what this will actually be real devolution. One of the many absurdities about the SNP after 19 years is that devolution, they want power to come from London to Edinburgh, but when it comes to Edinburgh, it stays in Edinburgh. And what we need to do is get power down to 32 local authorities and have them freed up from central diktats that come from Edinburgh. So my view on this is that once we've allowed this to happen, local communities know what's best that happens in their communities. Now, I've got some experience of this. When I was in the Scotland office as a minister, I was involved in a lot of the city deals and local regional deals and levelling up deals, and I spoke to all the 32 local authorities. And what I discovered in my travels around Scotland is it doesn't actually matter what the political party is that you're talking to. Local people and the local councils want one thing. They want what's best in their community, and they know what's best in their community for their community. So again, I say that I think we need the local authorities to be empowered to do this. That is where the results will come from. That is where we'll get the best impact, from local authorities being empowered to make those decisions, and they can make their choices as to where they put their funding. But freed up funding and free decision making will be greatly enhance local communities.
Okay. Neil Bibby from Scottish Labour.
Well, everyone in Scotland deserves access to culture, and that's not just about people in Glasgow or Edinburgh, but people north, south, east and west of Scotland. And we do need to, I think, look at the impact that local council funding cuts has had, because it's in many places it is the councils that are the primary provider of cultural opportunities in communities. The Culture Committee of the Scottish Parliament did an inquiry a while back in terms of looking at the issue of culture in communities. Venues is crucially important. Public transport is crucially important. I think Q mentioned that earlier, because it might not be achievable to have everything that we want right on our doorstep, but that ability to have affordable, accessible public transport to get people to and from different places is vital. I think actually another thing that Murdo mentioned earlier, the cuts to national performing companies. Now, although they often are based in Glasgow and Edinburgh, one of the things that they do over the summer is they do tours of remote parts of Scotland, and some of that agenda is being put in jeopardy because of the funding cuts that they are currently experiencing. So we do need to recognise that, and also issues such as there's also assets that we need to support, which I'm pleased do happen, like the screen machine that goes around different parts of remote and Highland and Island communities in Scotland, bringing film to those remote areas. So we need to support initiatives like that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Q Manivannan, Scottish Green Party.
Thank you. I think we do need to address the elephant in the room, which is the loss of the CCA, and I do know, especially considering that Creative Scotland was both the funder and the landlord, that sheer degree of mismanagement can't be well dismissed, and which is why we've been, us and our MSPs have been seriously pushing Creative Arts Scotland to make sure that the individuals who were just left in the lurch without access to their personal belongings, finances, many of them had their visa statuses affected, are given some kind of restitution and are taken care of, because Creative Scotland does have a duty of care towards these individuals. But that being said, I was reading poetry last autumn at the Abreakin Forest Community Hall, and it was one of the most tender moments that I had in my arts career in Scotland. And as some of the people on stage have mentioned already, decentralization is essential. We do need individuals to be consulted in terms of how their money for culture and arts are being spent, well before we decide upon our budgets and our allocations, rather than afterwards by the Scottish Government. And the Edinburgh Greens and our councillors have also been pushing for better access to cultural spaces in many circumstances, whether that's free tickets to Christmas events in Murrayfield or elsewhere, or in terms of just making sure that locked out groups have the ability to access cultural spaces. But that aside, I mean, again, I'm sorry to bring this back to you, Malcolm, but it's always a delight when you speak of devolution. Didn't you in 2014 say something along the lines of, the union is like a cup of hot chocolate, I just want to keep it? So I don't quite buy that devolution is the plan there.
Okay, and that's time. Angus Robertson from the SNP.
Well, we've heard the first, and we'll be hearing a lot of it in the campaign, I hope we heard it, is the opposition of reform to devolution and how they want to undermine the Scottish Parliament. In general, I think it's important to put on the record that it's not politicians that do culture. So it's not the Scottish Government, it's not MSPs, and it's not councillors. It's the cultural community that does culture and the arts. But government, national and local, plays an important role. And that's why I think the introduction of multi-year funding is really important, for the obvious reason that it's now reaching more venues and organisations across Scotland, 28 of our local authorities. But it does then beg the question, why not in the remaining 4? And although we have tremendous initiatives, Culture Collective, Community Collective, which delivers in other parts of Scotland in parallel to multi-year funding. I do think we need to better understand not spots. Not spots which have, because of local government funding decisions, been detrimental, but for other reasons why there is not cultural provision in particular parts of the country. That's one of the areas that emerges from the Creative Scotland review, that the data that is held by Creative Scotland can be better used to make sure we understand where these not spots exist. Where is it that targeted resources can be aimed at supporting the culture and arts community in those areas? And that's something that I'm wanting to take forward from the Creative Scotland review. So much more that can be said.
Okay, thank you. That's time. And Euan Davidson from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. I think we need to be clear where most people experience culture. It happens in our libraries, our town halls, our community theatres and our youth centres, not just in our national institutions. So at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think the most important thing, again, is financial stability for local government when we're talking about regional issues. We also need fairness in national distribution. The Creative Scotland figures are horrifying. 300 times, per head spending is 300 times higher in Edinburgh than it is in Lanarkshire. That cannot be acceptable, and it's a disgrace, frankly, that it's been allowed to last that long. Our major cities are our cultural hubs, but opportunity can't depend on postcode. I also just want to quickly pick up on the taxation point that Murdo made. In the recent Scottish Government budget, we delivered 170 million in funding for hospitality, including music venues and other cultural venues. Now that's a start, but we need to go much further. We need to see planning reform, and we need to see reform in business rates so that we don't lose even more of these venues, which are really important in our regional creative scenes. Thank you.
Okay, excellent, thank you. That's us halfway through. We're 3 questions in. How's the temperature in the room? Is it good? A bit cold now? Okay. Would you like my jacket? We can maybe give that down a wee touch. Okay, we won't open anymore, I promise. Okay, how are we doing for water on the panel? We all good? Excellent. So we're almost running to time. Let's move on quickly now to question 4, which is on equality, equity, diversity, and access. Across participants, audiences and the cultural workforce, there remain persistent and intersectional inequalities linked to gender, class, disability, race, geography and income. Research shows that greater diversity in the workforce drives innovation and outperforms on profitability. Beyond the business case, there are ethical and human rights considerations for achieving equality in the sector. What specific actions will you take in the next Parliament to address these different barriers of inequality so that cultural life and cultural careers are accessible for all in Scotland and not determined by background, identity or postcodes? And this question, I'm very aware of the fact that myself and Q are representing the diversity in terms of ethnicity and gender here. But Neil Bibby, we're going to address this question to you. For a 2-minute response, please.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, clearly I said earlier in my opening statement that we want a fair and equal society and we want a fair and equal culture sector too, and the two are interlinked, as I said at the very start. And we need to break down the barriers for all who face them in terms of getting access to careers and opportunities in the culture sector. We can't afford for a potential to go untapped, and we need to recognise the strength that there is in diversity in Scotland, and that diversity needs to be represented in the culture sector, and there will be, that's represented in different groups. Obviously there are challenges for women in the culture sector, there are challenges for ethnic minorities in the culture sector, there's challenges for working class people in gaining careers and opportunities in the culture sector, LGBT group, so many. And these are often compounded if you have any more than one of those characteristics. It can be even more challenging. So we do need to make sure that we are having the support in place to support those to access those opportunities, to make it fully accessible for those with low income backgrounds in particular. I think often the culture sector, there is a lot of internships, unpaid work that people from well-off backgrounds can afford to take, but those on low incomes can't. So we do need to look at addressing those issues. And there's also a cultural issue itself in making everyone feel welcome, open, and part of our culture sector is vitally important. And I think that's something that the government and the Parliament should take a lead on in ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to succeed and everyone has the opportunity to make the most of their potential.
Thank you very much. And now 90-second responses from each of the panel. We'll start with Manivannan from the Scottish Green Party.
Thank you. I think when we, again, think of what representation means, I believe it starts from the application form. As someone who has walked into many halls trying to acquire funding for the work that I do know the impact that my identity has in acquiring that funding. It's no coincidence that disability-friendly art spaces are at the forefront of many cuts to venues and funding. It's no coincidence that Edinburgh had no inclusion of public art or graffiti in their public art strategy until the Greens came in. And I think when we're thinking of equality, I've benefited, and so have many others, from existing schemes and funding that is directly oriented towards people from marginalised identities. Creative Scotland's creative inclusion, I believe, £320,000 that go towards people from marginalised communities. Sorry, Malcolm, I have to go at you again. But it's like, if Reform would like to cut the Equality Act, Reform would like employment rights to go, which means that £320,000 is gone, essentially. So when we are speaking of money, and money is the only thing that most of us marginalised folks, of course, want, I think it's essential for us to remember that culture is again created by many of these people from marginalized spaces. We are at the forefront of it. Half of minority ethnic workers have said that their ethnicity is a barrier to career progression. We see the sheer lack of representation despite the claims that we are invading this country in leadership of people of color and of women and of trans people. We see that, again, if Reform actively is campaigning to abolish DEI in public circumstances, I'm not quite sure what form of diversity, equality or inclusion they're thinking of.
And now Angus Robertson from the SNP.
So firstly, just very much endorse what our Q has said in terms of our approach. We're only going to succeed where the opportunities for all people of all backgrounds is made as easy as possible. In the Scottish Government, we initiated a Fair Work Task Force. There will be many people in the audience who work in culture and the arts who are freelancers, and I am very well aware, and I hope other members of the panel are very well aware, how precarious that existence is for a great many people. And as I said to members of the Fair Work Task Force, I have a bit of an understanding, having worked for 10 years myself as a freelancer. So we have been looking at what government can do. We have been looking at what Creative Scotland can do, and we've already had some testimony which points to the fact that there is active support out there. The last thing we need to be doing is cutting that. What we also need to do is work out where we can make a big difference in skills development, and that training, that opportunity being open to all. And one example which I think is a trailblazer is Scotland becoming the first country in the world to introduce screen studies across our primary and our secondary schools. It will open up opportunities for young people who would never ever have imagined that they might be able to get into screen, whether that's television or film, and we know that they want to spend half their lives online or on screens anyway. I think it's a great thing that we're going to introduce a study of that in our schools. The more we can do off that, the mainstreaming of culture and the arts in our schools is mission critical to letting everybody understand that if they want to be active in culture and the arts, regardless of background, there is a path to success in Scotland. Okay,
thank you. That's time. Euan Davidson from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. First of all, I would agree with Q. It's depressing to say this, but the first step we have to do is protect the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act. It's the fact that there's parties on this panel questioning those acts is depressing in itself. We want to see Creative Scotland introducing targeted funding towards marginalised groups, including disabled artists, ethnically diverse artists, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. I would also agree with Neil that we really need to tackle the scourge of unpaid internships. They are often the biggest barrier for working class creatives to enter the industry, and we need to take concerted action to abolish that. I would also go back to the problem of regional funding. I'll repeat what I said before, 300 times per head spending in Edinburgh versus other parts of the country. Unless we tackle that, we cannot expand opportunities to working class artists, to queer artists, to ethnic minority artists. Regional funding is really important.
Okay, thank you very much. Malcolm Offord, you've been taking a bit of a pounding on the panel. Now's your chance to respond.
All good. So my view on this is that the best way to create equality is to give, particularly our young people, starting from right from early years, a good education. They can be educated, learn to respect everybody, wherever they come from, speaking a common language and having a common culture. Now, my view on this is that we have got a problem in our schools. So we have just over 700,000 registered school pupils in Scotland. And right now there's 230,000 of those not regularly attending school. So we've got a problem in our schools. And the attainment gap between kids in more affluent areas and less affluent areas is widening, not closing. And this is having a result in creative arts, where we're being told now that there are less kids, for example, from working class backgrounds, like a James McAvoy, you know, classic Scottish Glasgow lad. We've got less of them coming through to the creative arts. And it must simply be because there's something going wrong in our school environments. What is happening that we've got 230,000 of our 700,000 school community not regularly in school? So my feeling on this is we've got to really deal with this in the schools. We have diversity, which is welcome in our schools, but we need people to pull together, be integrated together, and feel the kind of a common education. No segregation, integration, cohesion, education. That is the key to equality.
And Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Okay, thanks. So culture and the arts must be one of the most diverse sectors of Scottish society, and everybody should have an equal opportunity. And I've seen some really fantastic work that's done with disadvantaged groups. There's a neighbour of mine, I live in Perth, a neighbour of mine, Euan White, who's a musician who has something called the Inspiration Orchestra, where he works with adults, mostly adults with severe disability, and in some cases learning difficulties, and brings them together to make music, which they thoroughly enjoy, and it's, it makes such a difference for them to see that happen. And he does that on a very small budget. He relies on funding to make that happen, and it's so important that is contained. But I want to agree with something Malcolm just said, because I think this starts at a very young age. It's about making sure there are opportunities for everybody in schools, particularly in primary schools, to enjoy music and the arts. And it is a problem that we've seen, for example, cuts in music tuition in so many councils across Scotland. We also see projects like Systema, the big noise in the Raploch in Stirling, part of the area I represent, bringing kids from a part of the Stirling, historically very deprived, giving them fantastic opportunity to come together and make music. So there is good work going on, but it's very important that the arts is not becoming exclusive to middle-aged white men like most of the panel tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to question 5, workforce and conditions. Many artists and cultural workers face insecure contracts, low pay, and limited progression, with freelancers particularly exposed to risk. Beyond improving pay, security, and working conditions across the cultural workforce, financial pressure and instability in recent years have narrowed what feels possible for individuals and organisations alike. What measures will you introduce to strengthen the cultural workforce and restore a sense of ambition, risk-taking and long-term career confidence across Scotland's cultural sector? And that question is asked to Euan Davidson for the Scottish Liberal Democrats for a 2-minute response.
Thank you. I think the first thing we need to recognise is that for many entrepreneurs, for many freelancers, self-employed people, they need confidence, they need stability, and they've had a really, really hard 5-10 years. With Brexit, with the Liz Truss budget, with the pandemic, there has been so many government changes, and we need consistency, we need stability. Specifically, we want to launch a skills strategy in our in the next term of the Parliament, which would identify gaps in the workforce so that we can really target the investment, the education investment into those areas. And I would say a really important part of that is protecting our college budgets, our further education budgets. Too often, under the last decade, again, we have seen sustained cuts to college funding, which has resulted in the loss of a lot of creative courses, which are a really important stream for people to enter the industry. And I'm glad we were able to secure some more funding for that in the latest budget rounds, but it's not enough. We've just seen Halla campus close, not far from Edinburgh, which provided a range of creative courses. That's not good enough. That can't be acceptable. And just one last point I would say, I think we need to, you'd expect this from a Liberal Democrat, we need to start rebuilding a relationship with Europe. That is so important for filling this skills gap. The fact that the UK government will not even consider a youth mobility scheme is frankly astonishing. It's such an easy route to fill these skills gaps, to drive economic growth and to rebuild our economy. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have 90-second responses. Everyone knows the drill. We'll start with Neil Bibby from Scottish Labour, please.
Well, I would just agree with the first part of Euan's question there, in terms of answer there was in terms of secure and stable funding will help with secure and stable employment. And I think that's absolutely critical, and that's why I said before we are committed to secure, stable, predictable funding, multi-year funding for the culture sector, so that you can have confidence, individuals can have confidence that you can make the planning decisions, the organisations can make the planning decisions, and workers can have confidence in their own security as well. In terms of more wider than that, fair work is absolutely critical and important. I agree with the fair work principles that Angus mentioned earlier, but it's not enough just to say we adhere, we support the fair work principles. It's not enough to just say we're committed to the fair work principles. It's not just enough to tick a box saying we're committed to the fair work principles when we know fair work is often not what people experience. So I do think there does need to be a much more stronger focus and on fair work and ensuring that happens. And that involves fair work enforcement and making sure that we have that delivered for the people who need that security. And I would go further and say, in terms of the Creative Scotland and its board, we have trade union representation on boards of things like ScotRail. Why not have trade union representation on the board of Creative Scotland?
Okay, thank you. Malcolm Offord from Reform.
Well, the first thing I'd say for any of you in the room who've chosen a career in creative industries, I've got the greatest respect for you, and Q, you're one of those, because it is a precarious profession. There's no doubt about it. It is a more precarious profession than most regulated jobs, whether it be a lawyer, a doctor, or whatever else it might be, a nurse, etc. So it does come with that, and I think everyone who goes into it knows that to be the case. I think you have to be very ambitious to go into that sector. I think you need to back yourself. You have to take a lot of rejection along the way. And I think at the end of the day, it comes back to the central message is if we need more funding, we need to grow our economy. That is really what we're talking about here. We need more tax revenues. And the way to drive tax revenues is to make people more productive. We have not done that for the last 10 years. We have had economic stagnation, whether it's in London, whether it's in Edinburgh, actually across most of Europe. We need to have a different approach to how we grow our economy. We have to be productive, and that will drive a lot of funding, which will then give the stability that everybody is looking for. I think that's the opportunity for us, and I think that's what we're going to be talking about in our manifesto. We're going to be talking about how we effectively unleash the potential of Scots. So I think that people were underperforming as a country. I think we're underperforming in many areas, in business as well as the public sector. I've talked about the schools already. I think we need to have a real good hard look at that and say we can do better and be more ambitious.
Okay, thank you. Murdo, Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Thanks very much. So I think everybody so far has spoken about funding. So I agree with funding, but this is not just about the public sector funding. It's about attracting private investment into Scotland. And if you look at, for example, filmmaking, TV making, We've seen tremendous growth in that across the UK in the last 20, 30 years. It was a previous Conservative government that brought in tax breaks for filmmaking in the UK. The UK is now, after America, the best place, the most popular place in the world to make film and high-end TV. So we are attracting money in, but it's not trickling through enough to people on the ground who need to get secure employment. Now, I've just been discussing with Screen Scotland some of these issues because constituents have brought this issue to me. And, you know, there's a problem because you get production companies based down south who get commissions to make films about Scotland, and they'll come up for a few weeks at a time and do some filming. But the real well-paid jobs in production are still anchored south of the border. And it's about how we try and create a regime that makes it more attractive for more people to come to Scotland. And that's around looking at the tax system, looking around incentives. How do we get more people to come and base themselves here? And when it comes to something like, for example, BBC Charter renewal that's coming up, where the BBC are going to have to justify their future, whether they have a licence fee, how they're funded. I think it's quite legitimate for us to say, as a country and as a government, you've got to have more production here in Scotland and base more jobs here.
Okay, that's time. Manivannan from the Scottish Green Party.
So I actually agree with Malcolm in the sense that I think there is money required and artists need to be paid. But it's also important to know what the state of arts and culture and workers in Scotland are, which is that compared to 14% of UK-wide artists and creative sector workers being freelance and part-time, in Scotland that number is 48%, which means a lot of them are either self-employed or not within a formal employment structure, which is why I think from the Greens I have personally been pushing for us to implement an artist basic income, taking on from Ireland's success. We've seen it to be economically viable. We've seen it a circumstance that returns €39 for every euro that's spent on artists. And we know in Edinburgh of all places how much the arts can sustain other industries and other economies as well. But besides that, I do think there's a fair wage crisis at the end of the day. And I mean, you could see that in Edinburgh councillors, the Green councillors have made sure that the Capitol Theatres made sure that they stuck to their fair work conditions. But also I think we need to make sure that, there's independent task force reports that have come out that have made it clear that commitments in the arts will not just automatically appear. I think we need to ensure that first and foremost, things like the CCA closure cannot be allowed to be repeated. But also, besides that, we need to make sure that we apply conditionality. We apply conditionality in other circumstances. Why not here? No funding if not for fair work, if not for a real living wage. And I think that's precisely the angle that we need to go for. And I think we need to pay artists, Malcolm, including Deacon Blue, who you cited in your opening speech. But that's a different conversation.
Okay. Angus Robertson from the SNP.
There's so much in it, and I don't want to repeat things that other colleagues have said, which I agree with, but just one thing en passant is it's one thing speaking warm words about supporting funding, but you actually have to vote for it. And we've just gone through a budget process which the Conservatives voted against, the Labour Party abstained. I can't remember what Reform did, they probably voted against it. So beware of warm words, but not actually delivering on the funding that we say that we're in favour of. So a couple of things. I think it's absolutely right that if we believe that fair work should be driven through the culture and arts sector where public funding is made available, that we need to make sure that organisations are passing on that funding on a fair and equitable basis. So point one. Point two, there was brief discussion about our relationship with the rest of Europe. Brexit has been an absolute calamity supported by Reform and unfortunately continued. Unfortunately, the UK Labour government wasn't prepared to adopt the suggestion of the Scottish government that the UK should rejoin Creative Europe. I think it's massively important to our culture and arts sector that we are re-engaged with Europe. We want our young people to be able to tour, we want them to be able to work elsewhere, and we want people to be able to come here. And part of the things that we are committed to doing, amongst other things, and you would expect me to say this when the Scottish Music Industry Association is in the second row, is we're committed to delivering a cultural exports office to support our young and emerging talented people to earn on a fair and equitable basis, but to be able to thrive by touring and performing internationally. And that's something that we're committed to.
Okay, thank you. Now on to question 6, education, young people and skills. If we want a thriving cultural sector in 10 or 20 years, we need strong foundations. Now in schools, youth provision and skills pathways. This includes specialist arts teaching, clear progression routes into creative careers, and sustained youth provision beyond the classroom. It also includes recognising the wider impact that creativity across the curriculum can have on confidence, attainment, well-being and community connection, as well as the role of international exchange and collaboration in expanding horizons and professional opportunity. How will you strengthen youth provision, arts education and creativity more widely within learning to ensure young people across Scotland can participate in and shape cultural life? And this question is asked to Malcolm Offord from Reform for a 2-minute response.
Thank you. Well, we've talked about education a bit this evening because I think we all know it sort of begins there. And we do have a problem in our schools. I said earlier in terms of the non-regular attenders, about almost a third. And we also have an issue where we're not, I think, giving enough attention to specialist teachers within our schools, and Reform would be very committed to that, and particularly around the culture and music scene. I think that we need to reassess how we prepare our people for the modern world, the 21st century world. Where we are teaching kids to do jobs that don't yet exist. How does that work? How can you do that as a teacher? And where we, perhaps in my generation, came out of school thinking you might do 3 jobs in your career, but the next generation might have to do 30 jobs. Might have to reskill and retool up and have continual adult re-education. My view on this is that we have got certain centres of excellence in Scotland where we have got genuine world-class capability down to our geography, our science and our people, and creative arts is one of those. And I think we need to start identifying at a much younger age where talent lies. Instead of letting people drift through just a pure academic curriculum and then ending up at universities that actually don't give them meaningful jobs or jobs that are going to be taken away by AI, can we start thinking about how we actually position kids at a younger age into a line of work that they can get meaningful jobs? Now, within that 230,000 of school pupils who are not engaged in school at the moment, I bet you there's a huge amount of talent in there that would love to do creative arts, would love to do creative industries, but it's not in the mainstream of the education system they're in. Isn't that our opportunity to try and reach out to every single child? Every child has got talent. We just need to find what it is, and I think we're losing a lot of talent. I think we need to really reassess how we run our curriculum in schools.
Okay, thank you. And now the panel now have 90 seconds to respond, and we'll start with Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Thanks very much. I've got 2 children, one's at university, one's just about to leave school, both of them very talented performers in music and musical theatre. I don't know who they get that from, it's not me, obviously. But they do well because they get that at school. And I think, particularly from the youngest age, if people see role models in school, they see teachers who are engaged, who are actually able to provide a vision of what a future in culture is like, that will put people on the right path. And I think we touched on briefly earlier this issue of the loss of, in so many schools, dedicated music tuition. And I think that's been an absolute tragedy for Scotland, because you've got talented kids whose parents can't afford to pay for tuition. You know, if you're the kid of an MSP, you're all right because your dad and mum can probably afford to pay for the tuition. But if you're from a child from a not so well-off background, that loses you that opportunity, and I think that's a tragedy. So we have to make sure that there is that appropriate support for music tuition in schools. There's great work done by the likes of we're talking about the national performing companies. I've seen great work done by the likes of Scottish Opera going into schools and providing kids with an experience they wouldn't otherwise have. If kids at a young age see this as a career path and see this as an opportunity for the future, that's how we tag them in.
Okay, thank you. Now, Neil Bibby from Scottish Labour.
Well, if we want to tackle inequality in terms of the arts and culture sector, we need to tackle inequality in childhood. and that means closing the huge opportunity gap that there can be, as Murdo said, between kids that go to state schools and private schools, and those from low-income backgrounds and those from more well-off backgrounds. I've got 2 children myself who go to local primary school. One's in the choir and one's in the art club. They love it. It's about giving them the opportunity, though. We don't want to force kids to do things they don't want to do, but every child should have the opportunity to learn to play an instrument and experience different experiences when they're growing up. I think there's absolutely, we need to support instrumental music provision and teaching in our schools, and I think there's things that we can do to also support that and not replace it. I want to be clear about that. I think there are models and online platforms that have been used in some schools, online music support platforms that can be used as an introduction to music teaching, that can be delivered by non-specialist music teachers. So I think that's a role, but I want to emphasise that's not as a substitute for instrumental, but it's just as an addition to that, to give them the opportunity, to give them that introduction. I think that's really important. I think also on a very practical level, because of the funding cuts we've seen, schools are finding it more difficult to do maybe trips to museums and other places. I do think we need to look at that issue and how we can best support kids getting every opportunity to make the most of their potential and have the greatest experiences in life.
Okay, thank you. Hugh Manivannan from the Scottish Green Party.
So if I'm not wrong, I believe 1 in 5 young Scots want to engage with the creative industries at some point in their life, and that's not just a number, that's an actual active claim that young people are making on their democratic and cultural life. They are stating that this is important to them. Which is why, again, I'm sorry, Malcolm, but it's one of, I'm new to politics, so perhaps I'm confused by a lot of things, but I've never heard so many words that don't actually say much. Whilst Reform's position is to cut the wasteful degrees or the arts education that you so claim to be championing at the moment. Like when you made the comment in an earlier question about people speaking a common language and culture, well, surveys have shown that immigrant and people of color in the arts, 93% of them speak fluent English, and if not more, and the rest of them speak some degree of English. But that aside, I think that access for young people to the arts isn't just about the arts, it's about everything else that makes arts possible, which is why when the Greens delivered free bus travel for under 22s, it means someone from all the way in I don't know, from Edinburgh can go to Inverness and see theatre there, because someone from Glasgow can attend the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, right? And that's not framed as arts policy, but it actively is arts policy, especially in a space like Scotland. And it gets, even further, I think we do actively need to protect arts education, and that is constantly coming under threat as seen as particular types of education that are of utility and are instrumental towards the economy, whilst others are not. And protecting that should very much be at the top of our priorities. But also, I think it's furthermore framed in terms of enabling teaching in the arts sector. And I know a lot of our other colleagues have ensured. Oh, I'll stop. Never mind.
Okay, thank you. Angus Robertson from the SNP.
It's really difficult, isn't it, trying to do this in time. So the first thing is, I don't know whether there are any music teachers or drama teachers or primary school teachers or secondary school teachers in the room. Like Neil, I've got 2 very young kids, and their experience at school is first class. And they explore creativity in all sorts of ways that definitely wasn't the case 150 years ago when I was at primary school in Stockbridge. So the first thing is, let's acknowledge there is fantastic teaching out there. There are amazingly talented teachers. But on the issue of transformational impact, here is one area that I will agree with Malcolm. Is that we need to approach young people where they are, what they want to do. And I've been very closely associated with the development of the Screen Studies initiative. And I would encourage all of you, please go on the Screen Scotland website, have a look at the documentation in and around it. One of the most interesting bits about it is the transformational impact it had on the pilot schools and on attendance in those schools, because young people were literally skipping to school because they loved Screen Ed so much. And so we have an opportunity, and maybe this will light the way for further similar initiatives in this way. We need to meet young people with their aspirations in culture and the arts. And we know the transformational impact that culture and the arts can have. And my time's over. There we go.
Okay, thank you very much. Euan Davidson, Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. I'm lucky enough to sit on Edinburgh's Education Committee. Before this council term, when the SNP ran the council, we saw year-on-year cuts to school funding to devolve school budgets. That meant less money to close the attainment gap, but it also meant less curriculum choice, less choice for our young people. And often the first casualties of that choice is the creative industries. It's arts, it's drama, it's music. And that can't be right. I'd also like to highlight that the Scottish Government have broke their promise to reduce teacher contact time. That's really important time for teachers to plan trips, to engage in extracurricular activities with our young people. That failure to deliver the promise to reduce contact time has demoralised the workforce and reduced our ability to engage in creative activities with young people. I'd also like to go back to colleges. Further education's had a 20% cut since 2021. That's so often the route that people can engage in creative industries, especially from socio-economic backgrounds that traditionally don't engage in our industry. And often these cuts are targeted at arts courses rather than what's seen as the utility courses. And just finally, I wanted to pick up on the last part of the question on international exchange. One of the best things we can do, as I've already said, is re-engage in the Youth Mobility Scheme with Europe. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we've reached time for closing remarks for all the candidates. I'm afraid you only have a minute each because we're already about 5 minutes over. We're going to make our way just down the panel. We'll start with Q Manivannan from the Scottish Green Party. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jill. This has been very lovely. And despite all the things I've said, Malcolm, I do believe that you believe that artists can be people of any colours and gender and sexual orientation, despite not being up for same-sex marriage, among other things. I'll leave that be. But tonight we've spoken about funding, we've spoken about workforce regulations, we've spoken about making sure that young people have access, but I think I'd like to just end on something far, far simpler, which is that the arts has a far bigger role, again, as Angus said, than money. It is what keeps me in this country in many ways. It is what gives me sustenance when I need it most, and I know the communities that are formed from it in very real time. Culture is also just how we know who we are, and it's not a luxury. To borrow from a previous quote, culture and arts are not the cherry on top of a cake or even just the cake itself. Culture is our daily bread. And to make sure that we protect that, we need to ensure that the threats are very much addressed. And unfortunately, the threats are on stage with us today. And in that light, very specifically, I think the Scottish Greens believe that culture must be accessible to all. We brought in the visitor levy, we're pushing for universal basic income, and I am for artist basic income, and we'll keep doing so.
Thank you very much. Neil Bibby from Scottish Labour.
I'll try not to get cut off in my closing statement. No, seriously, thank you for this evening. Thank you for your engagement. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I've always enjoyed my engagement with the culture sector, and I look forward to hopefully working with you in the years to come as well. Just a couple of quick things that other people have mentioned. CCA was mentioned. I didn't mention that. Absolutely committed to trying to work to secure a positive future there. Scottish Music Export Fund Office was mentioned. I'm committed to working with the music industry on that. And business rates was mentioned by Murdo. Scottish Labour is committed to looking at business rates reform in terms of supporting our hospitality venues. It's 10 weeks to the election, vitally important. It will determine the next 5 years. I hope I've demonstrated tonight some of the new ideas that Scottish Labour want to bring forward and secure should we win that election, which is crucially important to our country, whether we go in the new direction that Scotland so badly needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Thank you very much. Well, this is the first hustings I've done of the election campaign. And I hope the rest of them are like this, because it's been very civilised. Well, so far, very civilised, and with some very good discussions, very informative. So thanks for having me. Just to pick up a couple of points. Just one point Angus made about not voting for his budget. You know, we didn't vote for his budget because it's handing out business rates increases that are closing venues across the country, including music venues. So that's one very good reason, Angus, we didn't vote for your budget. I'll agree with something Q said. So culture is not a luxury. I absolutely agree with that. And if the culture is going to have a successful future, we need to have security of funding. That's not just public funding, it's attracting private funding. But for those who depend on public funding, certainty of funding is very important. A 3-year funding cycle is great nationally, but also needs to be reflected at a local level. Otherwise, we're going to see a loss of culture in the communities where it really matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Malcolm Offord from Reform UK.
Well, thank you. Like Murdo, I've enjoyed the discussion very much and very civilised along the way. Look, I think, Q, just to mention some of the things you mentioned there, we would agree, I think we both agree on the value of culture in this country. I have no question about that. But you've quite a shopping list of freebies that you want, whether it's free bus travel or universal basic income or trips to Europe. Nothing in life is free. It has to get paid for. And the focus of reform in this election is going to be about the economy. Because get the economy right, then nice things will follow. At the moment, we've got a funding squeeze because we're not growing our economy. We're spending more than we earn. You all have your own household budgets. You know how that works. You have to live within what you earn. And we're not at the moment. And we have to grow our economy. So the way to do that is to get our earnings up. And that is the focus of reform. All these other things are really nice to have. We want to have all of the goodies, but we've got to make money and create wealth. And so that will be the focus of reform in this election.
Thank you, that's time. And Euan Davidson from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Thank you for this evening. It's been fascinating, really educational actually. Just to recap what we want to see. We want to see stable multi-year funding for the creative industries and for local government, crucially. We want to see a fairer distribution approach to that funding. It cannot be right that certain parts of the country are funded 300 times less than others. We want to see a youth work bill, certainty in school funding, and restored college funding to restore the foundations of the creative industries. And we need a skills strategy. We need a skills strategy that values all our industries, but especially our creative industries. And we need to see access to finances for micro businesses and freelancers. And finally, we desperately need to re-engage with Europe and engage with a youth mobility scheme. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Angus Robertson from the SNP.
So it's been a very agreeable hustings this evening. Thank you very much for coming along, and thank you for people online for joining us too. It's taken literally to the end of this hustings to actually understand what is key in the forthcoming Scottish Parliament election when it comes to culture, because what Malcolm Offord has in effect acknowledged is his plans for massive public sector cuts in Scotland, and those cuts will fall on culture and the arts. So separate the warm words from the reality. I'm very sorry that literally every single opinion poll is suggesting that Reform is going to be elected, that it's going to be the largest opposition party in the Scottish Parliament. We need to understand what the threat of that is to culture and the arts. The SNP is aiming to be re-elected and to deliver on our promise of £100 million additional annually for the culture and arts sector. And if you want that happen, you should vote for the SNP in the election. We're 70% of the way there, and unlike those who voted against it, we're going to make sure it happens.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We are now at the end of the hustings. I'd like to thank all the panel for keeping to time. Well done. You're doing my job for me. It's a really big clock, and it's been judging us all night, but we've managed to get there before 9 o'clock, so I'm thrilled. This means that we do have time for teas and coffees upstairs. We've got light refreshments available to everyone in the audience here in the room. People watching at home, I'm afraid you will have to sort yourselves out. Please make your way to the upper balcony where these are available. I would like to thank all of the candidates for participating in this hustings. Thank you to Angus Robertson from the SNP. Thank you to Euan Davidson from the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Thank you to Malcolm Offord from Reform UK. Thank you to Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. Thank you to Neil Bibby from Scottish Labour. And thank you to Q Manivannan representing the Scottish Green Party. I would also like to thank Dovecot Studios and Cameron Events for hosting and live streaming this event. Thank you also to our event organisers, Culture Counts, the Federation of Scottish Theatres, the Scottish Contemporary Arts Network, Festivals Edinburgh, Equal Media and Culture Centre, and the Campaign for the Arts. Thank you to everybody involved. Representations from each of the organisations are here, and they will be available to speak in the upper balcony if you'd like to learn more about their work. Thank you again to everyone watching, everyone who sent in a question, and everybody in the room. Go and have a cup of tea and have a very lovely evening. I appreciate it.